Anybody count the number of shimmies from John? I think it was 0. Yes, how many? 3? We got 3? I saw 3 up there. So, but we are not here to celebrate the life and the music of John Sanford. Not yet. I'm going to try to narrate and fix my hi-hat at the same time. Does this look weird? It feels like it looks weird. Okay. I look better, though, don't I? All right. I needed to beat my band to the punch for that joke. So that tune that we opened up was recorded obviously multiple times, but the version we're referencing is from the great Count Basie, when Lester Young was with Count Basie. That was Pennies from Heaven. They recorded that in 1937. So Lester Young, this is actually, it's a little bit of a difficult show for us, because what Lester did, his contribution to jazz is so important and it's so specific, but it doesn't really rely on a particular song or a cool arrangement or anything. He just played, he had this way of telling a story. He could tell a story with very, very simple phrasing and ideas. And I always thought of it like this, like, I think of Louis Armstrong as kind of being jazz's Shakespeare. He took a language of music and found a way to make it a romantic language and a hip language at the exact same time. And Louis kind of created that for us. And then I think of Ellington as kind of being the, like the Picasso of jazz, taking colors and shapes and creating these new forms for us as jazz musicians to use. And in that respect, I think of Lester Young as kind of being more like the Robert Frost of jazz. He could say so much by using so little, and that was his gift. And he was really a master of what I call rhythm and rest. He, when he didn't play, and when he was just as important as to when he played, he he would make you, he would build up anticipation by playing something simple, waiting, playing another thing simple that was just slightly more evolved, and he would just keep doing that over and over again. It becomes this very cool, hypnotic way of playing that didn't require a whole lot. I mean, he's so important to the music, but he didn't change the language the way Charlie Parker did, or Duke Ellington did, or John Coltrane did. And he didn't have the facility, and he didn't change the instrument the way Louis Armstrong did, or the way Oscar Peterson did. He just basically was one of the most efficient and powerful storytellers in jazz, and we're going to do our best to kind of get that across today. So Lester was born in 1909 in Woodville, Mississippi, which is a couple hours north of Louisiana. His entire family, they all played instruments. His dad, Willis Young, or Willie Young as they called him, he was a musician. He was a traveling musician. He worked in carnivals and things like that. And all of his family played instruments. Actually, Lester started out on the drums, which seemed like a pretty good decision, wouldn't you would imagine? And then something went horribly wrong, and he switched to the saxophone for some reason. To hear him tell it, he said that he would be playing these gigs, and he's playing, and he's like making eyes with the girls out in the audience, and then the gig is over. And then, what we have to do after the gig is we have to tear all this stuff down and pack it up. And he said by the time he got done packing up, all the girls were gone. And they had left with the other guys who have nothing to pack up. And so he decided to switch to the saxophone for that very, very important reason. So, but his whole family played. So early on, like in the teens and in the 20s, he toured with the Young Family Band, which is what they were called. They toured all around. Early on in his life, they moved from Mississippi up to Minnesota. And that's really where he was raised, and the Young Family Band kind of got going. But he left the Young Family Band many times. The first time he left is because he refused to play in the South, obviously because of all the racism that a lot of these jazz musicians were enduring. So he just refused to play. Instead, he stayed around Minnesota and played gigs. As he developed, he would kind of keep coming back to his family's band. And then one day, he's listening to the radio, and there's a faint broadcast coming out of Kansas City all the way up to Minnesota. And he hears a band and a style of jazz that he had never heard before, and he just became transfixed with it. And the band at the time was called the Blue Devils, which would eventually become what we now think of as the Count Basie Orchestra. This was very early on in Count Basie's career. Count Basie had a steady gig in Kansas City, and it just so happened to be at a club that had a weekly radio broadcast, live radio broadcast. So he said that once he heard this music, he would start tuning in every week, and he said he couldn't take it anymore, and he packed his bags and he moved to Kansas City in hopes of playing with this band. So he's going to eventually work his way onto the bandstand. What's really cool about how Count Basie's orchestra came together, it was just a handful of them at first, 4, 5, 6 people, and they were playing this kind of swing dance music that was infectious. The rhythm section was great, and everybody loved this sound. And slowly but surely, more musicians would show up and sit in. And then Count Basie would have them just play all night. So he had one saxophone, and then he had 2 saxophones, and then he had a trumpet, and then 2 trumpets. And after a while, he had an entire big band of guys who just kept showing up. And he said, okay, you can play. But that's basically how he first got introduced to Count Basie. He's going to be one of the most important figures in the early sound of Count Basie, and we're going to demonstrate that sound for you right now. This is a song that was co-written by Lester Young and Count Basie. It's a little bit of an obscure Basie tune, but to me, it signifies or it symbolizes everything we think of with Lester Young. It's hip, it's swinging, but also the melody is very repetitive and it's very hip. So we're going to do that tune for you right now. It's entitled Dickie's Dream.
Come
Thank y'all so much. Dickey's Dream. So Lester's style, which was very light and airy and very simple, very understated, was quite a contrast from the most prominent tenor saxophonist of that time, his contemporary, Mr. Coleman Hawkins. Coleman was the the main soloist in one of the most popular bands, kind of there in the late 30s and early 40s, Fletcher Henderson. And Lester would eventually take over for Coleman Hawkins in Fletcher's band, and it did not go well. They not only did the band not enjoy the contrast of style, but the same thing for the audience. He just had such a different style than Coleman Hawkins, who was loud and brash and big, and a lot of other tenor players were trying to sound like that, and Lester just had a completely different approach. What I always think is cool is that, I mean, he's in some of the top swing bands of the day, and he's being asked to sound more like his contemporary Coleman Hawkins, and he refuses. He sticks to his guns, and eventually basically wins everybody over. This contrast between these two, you would think it would have caused a bitter rivalry between the two of them, but they were actually really good friends, and you know, Coleman had a ton of respect for Lester Young, and vice versa. So Lester popped in and out of Count Basie's band for his entire life. He would play with him for a while, leave and go do other stuff. One of the runs he went on, he rejoined Basie's band in the early 40s, right before, you know, because at the time, Count Basie was still just in Kansas City, and you know, he's being broadcast on the radio and is starting to get a little bit of buzz, but he hadn't become the Count Basie that we all know and love now. That started to happen in the early 40s when Basie finally got out of Kansas City and started partly being based out of New York, and started touring out of New York and playing all the big dance ballrooms in New York. And this is really where Count Basie's fame kind of started to blow up. And Lester was there for that. He rejoined Basie right before this started to happen. So he went on a nice 10-month run with Count Basie's band, touring all over the country, and this was, again, is in the early 40s. And then one night, they're playing a room in California called the Plantation Club. And they're playing it, and he and Basie's phenomenal drummer by the name of Joe Jones, they're hanging out at the bar, and then they get tapped on the shoulder by a couple of men. And the men were like, hey, so we've been sending you draft notices for the last several months, and you guys have ignored these. So just want to let you know, you guys are going to have to come with us and suit up for the war. So basically, at that gig, like in between sound check and the gig, they had been, you know, dodging that draft for as long as they could, and eventually they were put into the armed services during World War II. You know, there's all these great stories about, you know, Ted Williams and Joe DiMaggio, like, you know, losing like the prime of their careers to the war, and this absolutely happened to many of our great jazz musicians as well. And it really took the wind out of the sails of Basie's band. He lost his lead tenor player and his drummer, which we all know is the most important part of the band. So imagine losing that very, not so much here, but a lot here, if you know what I mean. It's like, but it actually took Basie a little while to recover from that. You know, he built up this great band, and now he kind of had to start over a little bit. So when Lester Young went into the Army, he had a very different experience than a lot of the white musicians who were also drafted. A lot of the white jazz musicians who were drafted played their instrument in the way they were part of the entertainment. They would go do USO tours, all that sort of stuff. Not the case for Joe Jones or Lester Young. They were put into general infantry, and Lester was assigned to a base in Alabama, and he received multiple run-ins, racial run-ins. He tried to refuse. He was nonviolent. He was a nonviolent person, and so you can imagine putting a person like that in the middle of training to go into the war. He tried to refuse to shoot a gun, which is kind of hard to do if you're in infantry. But he tried for as long as he could. He kept saying he was high and he was drinking so much that he probably shouldn't be holding a gun. He kept using that excuse over and over again. And then the MPs were shocked to find marijuana in his footlocker one day. And so basically he received a court-martial, and he spent like about I think it was a year and a half or so in basically in detention in the detention barracks. He was finally dishonorably discharged in 1949. Excuse me, 1945. And when he gets out, one of the very first things he does is he rejoins Basie for a little while, and he records a tune called DB Blues, which stands for Detention Barracks Blues. What a sense of humor on this guy. So we're going to play that tune for you right now. This is Detention Barracks Blues.
John, how's that for you? He's so accommodating now. At dinner, you were so adamant about the tempo. Now, yes, sir. The life and music of John Sanford, ladies and gentlemen.
DB Blues, 1946. So Kevin and I tend to refer to each other. We're the coal shovelers of the band. We just kind of sit back here and make the engine turn, push everything forward, and get covered in soot and just sweat. And then John and Louis get all the applause. So it's always a little surprising to either of us when we all of a sudden end up with a solo. So that's what you saw there, where Louis was like, "No, man, it's your solo." It's like, "What do you mean it's my solo? Like it's like yours. Like no one else is playing, man."
Somebody should be playing.
Somebody should be playing. John did his thing where he moved over to the side and then stood right in the artery where all the servers are. Sheila's trying to like bump him out of the way to bring you guys your crab cakes, and he's oblivious to it. I'm not in the way. Just look at me. I'm safely in my little space. Okay. No shimmies up here. I'm good. So that was we recorded that in 1946, basically right after he was discharged. One of the criticisms of Lester's playing post his time in the Army was that spending that time in the Army had a pretty dramatic effect on his sound. He sounded different when he came out of the Army. He played with a different tone. And if you listen carefully, you will notice that pre-Army Lester Young's his sound is different than post-Army Lester Young. But so people look at that as the Army, and obviously the Army did have a pretty heavy toll on him. He was said he basically drank more heavily after being in the Army. But from all the personal accounts that I read, Lester was still the same like easygoing, cool, hip, non-violent guy he was before he was drafted in the Army. He basically just refused to let the Army get to him, even if it meant he had to spend a year plus in the detention barracks and write a blues in his head the whole time. So what actually happened was that he changed, basically, to make the saxophone go. Trust me, it doesn't take much. There's that mouthpiece, and then there's a little wooden reed, he switched from is it made of cane normally? Is that right? He switched from a cane reed to a plastic reed. And he also he changed mouthpieces, and as any saxophone player would tell you, that can make a pretty dramatic effect or change of your sound. And he actually supposedly, right?
Same number of notes.
That's right.
Sounds the same to me.
We don't have Lester Young up here. We have Morster Young on saxophone tonight. That joke was funnier in my head. More, you got it now, like more, like you play more. Okay, so back to so this change in his sound did occur, but it had nothing to do with the Army. He actually did this while he was touring with Count Basie. Before he did it, basically right before he got drafted, and just went right back to it once he got out. So The other cool thing that happened is that basically once he got out, this was right in the early stages of when Norman Granz started his own record label, Verve Records, and he started these great shows, the Jazz at the Philharmonic. And when he heard that Lester Young had been discharged, he immediately got in touch with him and then started putting him on all these cool Jazz at the Philharmonic shows. A very, very cool and unique record came out of that collaboration. There's a really cool record. It's just trio. It's obviously Lester on tenor saxophone, the great Nat King Cole on piano, and then Buddy Rich on drums. And there's no bass. It's just the three of them. And it's a phenomenal record. Basically, Buddy and Buddy's bass drum and Nat King Cole's left hand basically do the job of a bass player.
Yeah, it's all right.
It's a phenomenal record. You guys should check it out. We're gonna play a couple of songs. It is cheaper. Lewis, how's that left hand, man? We could both make at least $12 more if we don't have this guy up here. We're gonna play a couple of tunes off of that record. It was released in 1946. The first one, probably my favorite cut off that record. Again, it's just a very kind of cool, hip, laid-back style that is Lester Young. It's a great tune entitled "I Cover the Waterfront." Lewis's instructions were to play a 4-measure intro. He played a 4-measure intro, and then nobody did anything. So he played another 4th bar intro. Yeah.
It could have been 12. It would have been
Yeah.
fine.
Okay.
Free jazz.
All right. So we're going to do one more song off of that great record with Nat King Cole and Buddy Rich. Again, I mentioned it's kind of a unique pairing to have a tenor, piano, and drums, but it really ended up being a great combination. So we thought the only way to truly pay tribute to a record that unique is to have the next song be a bass feature. So here is, we're going to feature Kevin Smith on another great song off of that record. This is entitled The Man I Love. Kevin Smith.
KBO commentary.
We were backstage, and somehow something came up, and one of them sang a little thing, and John said, "Oh yeah, that's Inspector Gadget," and Kevin goes, "Or the Hall of the Mountain King is actually what it really is," and then they're basically the same thing. Anyway, so he just quoted the Hall of the Mountain King, so I had to give him a little grief. I would have preferred Inspector Gadget, but that's okay. Great job, Kevin Smith. Let's give it to him up for him one more time. Good man. So, we're going to backtrack a little bit. This was in the mid to late 30s, while Count Basie, or while Lester was touring with Count Basie. They come through New York, and they're actually, it's part of that residency where they're going to be in New York for a while and play in the ballrooms and all that sort of stuff. While he's there, Lester needs a place to stay, and so he ended up subletting a room in this lady's house up in Harlem. And he was there, and nice lady, and the nice lady had a daughter, and they hung out for a little while, whatever, and then Lester went on to go back out on the road with Basie. And then a little while later, Basie announced that they were bringing a new member onto the band, and this lady walks onto the bus, and Lester and the lady looked at each other, and they realized that they had met a couple of years earlier when Lester had subletted that room to this lady's mom, and that lady was Billie Holiday. And the two of them, because basically Billie just got on the band, and Lester was the only one, the only person that she had ever even, had recognized before. And the two of them became fast friends. They had a pretty inseparable brother-sister relationship for most of their time together. They were to record many albums together, and they even gave each other their respective nicknames. Lester called Billie Holiday Lady Day. That's where that nickname came from. And then she called him Prez, as in the president of the saxophone. But they were very similar in their deliveries. They were light and airy and had this very cool romantic vibe to them. So they were a great fit to do a ton of recording together, which they did. So we're going to pay tribute to that very, very important musical relationship, one that really helped kind of shape the sound of jazz in the 40s for sure. We're going to do a tune that they recorded multiple times together. It's one of my favorite tunes, particularly by them. It's a sweet little tune entitled These Foolish Things.
I'll do the count. 1, 2, 3.
John Stanford, everybody. John Stanford. So, I mentioned that he gave Billie Holiday her nickname. One of the things that that he's known for, Lester Young is known for, outside of just jazz circles, is how much of the hip language that he basically codified and we all attribute to him. Words like cool and dig and break and fired and yeah. So as long as he keeps his left hand, and we can make more money without Kevin. That's all. Your left hand is okay. Okay. So cool and dig and bread and crib and actually Homeboy. He came up with Homeboy. That was his nickname for Count Basie. Was Homeboy. So he had. I mean, he was just the king of cool, not only in his playing, but also in how much of the that sort of language is in our lexicon, thanks to the uniqueness that was Lester Young. So, in the after these records with Buddy Rich and Nat King Cole and stuff in the late 40s going into the early 50s, this whole thing with jazz at the Philharmonic's really going to blow up for him. He's going to start touring the world, not only with jazz at the Philharmonic, but he's also going to start touring the world with his own band. He's going to spend months at a time in Europe, as a lot of jazz musicians did in the late 40s and early 50s. There was a huge demand for these American jazz musicians over there. They got treated well. They had tons and tons of gigs. So he was doing all that, and through this kind of like blooming of his career internationally, he actually starts to lose touch with Billie Holiday. They were still really good friends, but he just was gone too much. And obviously, technology back then was nowhere near what it is now. And the same thing happened with Count Basie. Basie was a really close friend of Lester's, but in the early to mid 50s, they basically barely spoke. And the same happened with Billie Holiday, just mainly because of their careers. But about 2 years before Lester's death, he got two chances to actually reconcile with both Count Basie and Billie Holiday, and these produced some of the most popular and important recordings to date. They're going to happen in 1957, and then in 1959, basically right before both Billie and Lester Young are going to pass away. In 1957, he's going to reunite with Count Basie and do a little tour. The main gig he's on is when Count Basie played the Newport Jazz Festival that year in 1957. They happened to record it, and it's one of the most popular Count Basie records of all time. And then a couple of years later, as I said, he got a chance to reunite with Billie Holiday. This is on film. CBS put together a special. I've talked about the special numerous times in these shows. It was called The Sound of Jazz, and they reunited Count Basie and Thelonious Monk is on there, Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Ahmad Jamal. It's just a phenomenal collection of musicians. But the really cool thing that involves Lester Young, Lester's actually going to play Dickie's Dream, that song he's going to play with the Basie band. But he gets a chance to play a really cool blues called Fine and Mellow with Billie. And Lester takes the very first solo, and they just pan back and forth from Lester, who's staring right at Billie Holiday, and Billie Holiday has this gigantic smile on her face. It is my favorite Lester Young solo, so if you get a chance to go on YouTube and check out Billie Holiday, Fine and Mellow, it's a black and white video. Check out Lester Young. It's a gorgeous solo. We're going to close the night out with one of those tunes off of that Basie at Newport record. But before we do, please help me thank one more time on tenor saxophone, John Sanford. On piano, Mr. Louis Hurbo. And on bass, Mr. Kevin Smith. My name is Justin Barnes. We are the Jazz Legacy Project. Thank y'all so much. We do this in a 6-month series, as I'm sure Tamara had mentioned. We basically spent the last 6 months kind of going over our greatest hits. Some of the ones, this started 7-8 years ago, and we've had a lot of new faces come in since then, so we kind of wanted to go back and redo some of those early shows and present them to some of our newer faces. Starting next month, we have a brand new set of shows for you. For a while, I usually try to do, once a year, I try to do a Miles Davis record. I instead of doing Miles Davis once, he just has had so many important records. He's had his hand in so many amazing things. I usually try to do something as a tribute to Miles, usually an album. So next month, starts on April 7th, only a couple weeks from now, we're going to do one of my favorite Miles records. It's entitled Milestones. We're going to have, what now? Oh, sorry. I thought they were talking. I just assume everyone's talking to me. We've talked about that this is a problem. So, but it's on April 7th, and we're going to have a trumpet, alto, and tenor sextet up here doing the great Miles Davis's record, Milestones. Also, this cycle, we're going to feature a couple of drummers, the great Max Roach and the great Elvin Jones. We're also going to do a show combining two singers who were really important, had very cool voices, but didn't really have the big careers that they should have had. And that is, we're going to do a night of the music of Billy Eckstine and the great Jimmy Scott. We have a phenomenal vocalist, Cleveland Jones, who's going to be joining us for that show. So you'll want to make sure you don't miss that. And then we're going to do, I also like to do some modern jazz. Some, not all great jazz came from the 40s. So we're going to take a night and focus on a record that came out in the 1990s, which had a big impact on the musicians on this stage. It's a great Joshua Redman album entitled Mood Swing. So make sure you come out and check that one out. That's going to be fun. And then in September, every September, we do a tribute to John Coltrane, because this is how all this got started. 11 years ago? Well, by the time we get to September, it'll be 12 years since we did our very first show like this, which was a tribute to John Coltrane, which is 12 years ago, which is insane. We usually, similar to Miles, we pick like a specific genre or a specific album. This time we're going to do the great John Coltrane album, Ballads. So that's what's coming up in our next 6 months. I hope you guys stick around. We're going to close out with one of my favorite Lester tunes. This is one of his most popular ones. The melody is simple, it's super swing, and it's super hip. There's lots of rest. All that stuff we talked about early is wrapped up in the song. They recorded it on that 1957 Basie live at Newport. Hope you guys enjoy this. This is Lester Leaps In. Thank you all so much. John, Lewis, Kevin, my name is Justin Barnes. Thank you so much for spending your Sunday evening with us. We'll see you all in April.